Her daughter-in-law slid a greasy tray toward her and smirked. Irene Walsh, retired paralegal and widow, didn't touch it. Jason, her only son, looked away again. By spring, they'd both be evicted, discredited, and served through court channels they never saw coming. She'd hosted their pity parties for 2 years now. She was hosting consequences. And when Brittany begged for mercy, the notarized apology would be framed behind Irene's good towels. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The tray landed in front of Irene with a hollow clack, a chipped ceramic plate, a fork with a bent tine, and a lump of meatloaf swimming in grease stared up at her. Brittany's manicured hand lingered on the edge for a second too long before she gave a sweet, venom-laced smile. "Eat up," she said, voice light, eyes sharp. "It's your last supper." From the kitchen, laughter echoed tight, forced, performative. Irene didn't turn to look. Jason was probably sitting at the counter, phone in hand, pretending not to hear. Pretending was easier for him. It always had been. The sunroom was dim despite the hour, shadows draping across the faded floral rug like bruises. Irene sat alone, her back straight, hands trembling slightly as she lifted the fork. Her mouth was dry. Her pride tasted bitter. The meatloaf was cold. Through the glass door, fireflies blinked above the grass, and in the quiet, the sounds from the kitchen carried clearer Brittany rattling glasses. The clink of silverware dropped too hard into the sink, her laughter high and triumphant, like a woman who'd already won. Irene chewed once, then set the fork down. Footsteps padded down the hallway, softer, hesitant. Haley appeared in the doorway, holding a real plate steamed vegetables, a baked potato, salmon done just the way Irene liked it, lightly seasoned. The teen sweatshirt sleeves were pulled over her hands, and her eyes flicked once toward the kitchen, then back. "I brought you this," Haley said softly. That one looked gross. Irene blinked at her. Haley never said much, but she always watched. She knew. "You deserve better," the girl added. Irene looked at the plate, then up at her granddaughter's face open, tense, waiting. She smiled, a slow, unfurling thing, and took the plate with steady hands this time. "I do," she said. Her voice was low but clear, "and I'm done waiting for it." Haley didn't ask what she meant. She just gave a single, small nod, then slipped away as quietly as she'd come. Irene didn't eat right away. She stared out into the backyard, at the creaking swing Jason had once built for Haley, long before Brittany came into their lives, before the bedrooms were rearranged, before her name disappeared from the mailbox. The plate of real food sat warm on her lap, but something colder had settled in Irene's chest, sharp and steady. She stood, careful with the plate, walked it to the kitchen, and set it gently on the counter without looking at Brittany. "You're welcome," Brittany muttered, back turned as she scrolled through her phone. Irene didn't answer. Instead, she moved down the hall to her bedroom, closing the door with a soft click. Her knees cracked as she knelt in the back of her closet, fingers reaching behind shoe boxes and stacks of faded linens. She felt for the edge of metal cool, familiar, waiting. The lockbox scraped slightly as she dragged it forward. Combination dial, still the same numbers. Click. Inside, yellowed paperwork, a pristine manila folder marked JR, confidential, and the small thumb drive Deborah had given her last fall, just in case things go sideways. Atop it all, a single faded photo. Irene, younger, standing beside a brass plaque outside a courthouse. Janelle was beside her, beaming in sunglasses. Irene had forgotten she even kept it. She traced the edge of the folder with one finger. From the hallway came the sound of Brittany's voice again, laughing, louder now, like someone who didn't know they'd already lost. Irene straightened her back, closed the box, and placed it gently on the bed. Then she reached for her phone and tapped a name she hadn't dialed in years. It rang once. Then a voice answered. Sharp, familiar, unhesitating. "I was wondering when you'd call," said Janelle Rivas. Irene's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. "I think it's time we talk extraction." A pause. "Or annihilation," Janelle replied. Irene looked down at the tray Brittany had left behind, still untouched on the nightstand, meatloaf congealing in the late afternoon heat. Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe both," she said. The first night they'd arrived, Irene had set out fresh towels. That was 2 years ago. It was supposed to be temporary. Jason had lost a contract. Brittany's job at the dental office had dried up. Just until we get back on our feet, Jason had said, standing sheepishly in the doorway with a duffel bag and a daughter who looked more confused than upset. Irene had nodded. Of course, that's what mothers did. She'd made Haley's bed herself. Back then, Brittany had said thank you with a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. Now the kitchen still smelled like Brittany's essential oil diffusers, lavender, lemongrass, and power. Irene hadn't cooked in that kitchen in almost a year. Her recipes, her knives, her cast iron skillet boxed and shoved in the garage when Brittany decided the clutter had to go. It hadn't happened overnight. That's what stung the most. It was inch by inch, cabinet by cabinet, shelf by shelf. Irene had told herself it didn't matter. She could still make tea in the sunroom. She still had her sewing machine. Her name was still on the deed. But then the master bathroom door started locking without her permission. Then her slippers were missing from the foot of her bed. Then Jason said, "It's just while Brittany's back's acting up, she needs the memory foam." As if Irene hadn't spent 40 years sharing that bed with a man who'd built the damn frame. She stared out the cafe window now, watching cars trickle past on College Avenue. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. She didn't touch it. Across from her, Janelle Rivas looked the same as she had the day they won their last paralegal case, together minus the shoulder pads, plus finer crow's feet. She wore her gray like a crown, streaked through jet black hair pulled into a blunt bun. Her suit was a deep plum that stood out against the beige booths of the diner. Irene slid a folder across the table slowly, deliberately. Inside, copies of bank activity, screenshots of text messages, a printout of the property title showing her as primary owner, a timeline, a history. Janelle didn't open it. Not yet. "You waited longer than I thought you would," she said quietly. Irene exhaled. "I kept thinking it would level out, that they'd remember it was my home." "They didn't forget," Janelle said, lifting her coffee. "They decided it didn't matter." The buzz of the espresso machine hissed from the counter. The waitress refilled a nearby mug without asking. Irene's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her own cup. "They've rewritten the whole place. Like I was some placeholder they had to step around. They wanted your silence. You gave it to them for a while." Janelle opened the folder and scanned the first few pages. Her eyes sharpened at the prescription log. "Jason tried to get power of attorney?" "Denied." Irene's voice was flat. "Brittany took the bedroom?" "Told Jason she'd clean it better if it felt like her space." Irene shook her head. "It was never about cleaning." Janelle flipped a few more pages, then stopped. "Do you want extraction or annihilation?" Irene didn't answer right away. She traced the edge of her mug, watching a mother outside herd 2 kids into a minivan. The air was thick with August heat even in the early morning. Cicadas buzzed faintly through the cafe's open windows. When she finally looked up, her eyes had gone flinty. "Both," she said. "But start with extraction." Janelle closed the folder and gave a slight nod. "Then the first step is documentation. Daily. Quiet. Legal." "I already have cameras," Irene replied. "Common areas only. Arkansas Code, Section 5 to 60, -120. Janelle gave a low, impressed laugh. "You never stopped being dangerous." "No," Irene said, standing slowly. "I just stopped pretending I wasn't." As they stepped outside, the heat hit like a wall, thick and unrelenting. Irene pulled her cardigan tighter not because she was cold, but because she wanted the weight. Janelle paused beside her car. "You know this won't be clean." Irene looked down the road, toward the house she'd once filled with Sunday roasts and piano lessons and birthday cakes that sagged in the middle. Now it smelled like synthetic oils and entitlement. "It doesn't have to be clean," she said. "It just has to end." She opened her car door. Inside the glove box sat a spiral-bound ledger, Deborah's handwriting visible through the clear plastic cover. "Start logging. Start now," her neighbor had said. Irene turned the key in the ignition. The dashboard lit up. And back home, a voice memo from Haley was waiting hidden in Irene's sewing basket. The sewing basket sat in its usual spot, wedged between the bay window and Irene's armchair, half full with folded calico scraps, a pincushion shaped like a tomato, and now tucked beneath the edge of a faded quilt squarea pale blue flash drive with a glitter sticker that read Haley's in tiny looping script. Irene lifted it between two fingers, felt the weight of it. Innocent on the outside, but Haley never did anything without intent. She slipped it into her laptop, glanced toward the closed bedroom door, and clicked play. Thursday. Mom said Grandma left the fridge open again, but it was her. I saw. She said it loud so Dad would hear. She always does that. Also, she threw away the banana bread. Said it smelled like dust. Grandma didn't say anything. She just looked tired. Anyway, I'm recording this in case anyone ever listens. Irene's hand hovered over the trackpad. Haley's voice was clear. Quiet, but clear. The file ended with static silence. Irene sat back, breath shallow, jaw locked tight. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached into the bottom drawer of the desk, pulled out the padded envelope Deborah had given her weeks ago, and opened it. Inside, 3 small cameras, barely larger than dice, motion, activated, synced to a cloud account that Janelle had helped her register over lunch. The envelope had come with a typed note. In case you decide to stop playing nice, D. That night, while Brittany and Jason watched a crime show in the living room ironically, one about inheritance fraud, Irene moved quietly through the house. One camera went above the pantry door, another behind the base of the living room lamp. The third, tucked into the corner molding above the hallway thermostat. All in shared spaces, all legal. She had the statute memorized like a prayer. The next morning, Brittany stood in the kitchen with her usual mug ceramic, oversized, printed with, "Not today, Satan." She waved her hand dramatically near the sink. "Ugh, what is that smell?" she announced. "Like wet dog and old perfume had a baby and it died." Jason looked up from his phone long enough to shrug. "It's probably the towels again. Or maybe the closet Irene refuses to clear out." "I cleaned that closet," Irene said quietly from the doorway. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. Brittany turned. "What?" Irene smiled. "Nothing." She poured herself a cup of coffee. The pot was nearly empty, the burner already cool. Behind the lamp in the corner, the little red light blinked once, then again. Later that afternoon, Irene sat with her laptop open on the patio, the video feed up in split screen. There was Brittany, dragging one of Irene's quilts from the hall closet and stuffing it into a garbage bag. "I'm donating it," she said to no one in particular, though Jason was sitting right there, still scrolling. "It smells like mildew and regret." Jason didn't even flinch. The footage played out in cold silence. Irene hit save clip, then another. She forwarded them all to Janelle. Within the hour, a reply came through. Subject: excellent start. "Keep feeding the lens. We're building a case brick by brick. Don't stop now." Irene minimized the email and stared out across the backyard. The swing still creaked faintly when the wind picked up, though no one had sat on it in months. Inside the house, a cupboard slammed. Brittany's voice again complaining loudly about how the coffee tasted like nursing home. Irene didn't move. She just clicked the next camera angle. In the hallway view, Haley paused outside Irene's bedroom, one earbud in, her hand resting on the doorknob. She didn't go in, just lingered, like she wanted to make sure something or someone was still there. And in that moment, Irene felt it not just the surveillance building quietly around her, but the weight of her granddaughter's eyes, not afraid, watching, waiting. Then Irene spotted something in the trash can in the corner of the living room, the corner of a bank statement, torn in half, addressed to her. The text came just after 9. "Brittany. Hey, need your routing number. Jason forgot to send rent to the landlord." Irene stared at the message like it was written in another language. The landlord, she thought. You mean me? She didn't respond right away. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a gif of a woman rolling her eyes. "Brittany, I'm not chasing him all night, just send it." Irene slid her glasses up the bridge of her nose and typed slowly. "Irene, ask your husband. He seems to have mastered the art of disappearing." She set the phone face down on the armrest and opened her banking app. The emergency fund still sat untouched, thank God. She kept that account under a different bank entirely. One Haley had helped her access through a Chromebook at the library. What Brittany and Jason could see was the joint household account used for bills and maintenance. Irene scrolled through the history, eyes narrowing. Months ago, subtle. Just a permissions request. Jason had submitted paperwork attempting to list himself as power of attorney. Denied, stamped in red. She'd shredded the notification letter and said nothing at the time. She hadn't wanted to believe he'd go that far. She believed it now. A knock sounded at the back door, quick, double-tap rhythm. Deborah. Irene unlocked it and let her friend in, the scent of cinnamon gum and winded sarcasm trailing behind her. "I brought backup," Deborah said, holding up a worn manila envelope and a scone wrapped in a napkin. "One for the courts, one for your soul." Irene took both. "Guess which one I need more today?" Deborah sat down at the kitchen table without waiting for an invite. She pulled reading glasses from her purse and slid them on like armor. "Janelle said you'd need someone who can track a dollar like a bloodhound." She nodded toward the envelope. "He's not cheap, but he's fast. Forensic accountant. Works from Little Rock, does remote consults. Ex-IRS. I already briefed him on the basics." Irene blinked. "You already?" "He owes me a favor. I helped his daughter file an HR grievance when her boss tried to write her up for having a miscarriage. A beat." "You're terrifying," Irene said. "I'm nosy and retired," Deborah replied. "Dangerous combo." Irene laughed. "Not long. Just enough to remember what it felt like." Her phone buzzed again on the counter. Another message. "Jason. You told Deborah? Seriously? She's blowing this up way too far." Deborah saw the name flash across the screen and smirked. "Tell him I'm just getting warmed up," she said, sipping from the chipped mug Irene handed her. "I think I'll let the silence scare him," Irene said. They opened the envelope together. Inside, a checklist for financial discovery, sample affidavits, and a form letter Janelle had prepared to freeze any joint access if Irene felt unsafe. Deborah read the instructions aloud, then tapped the paper twice. "We're going to map every transaction, down to the penny. Venmo, cash withdrawals, fake reimbursements, Etsy transfers. Whatever they've bled off you, he'll find it." Irene stared at the papers, then nodded once. "I want a trail so clear, even a judge with cataracts can follow it." Outside, the sun was fading, slanting gold light through the kitchen window, catching the dust in the air like it was hanging there on purpose. Deborah leaned back in her chair. "You know what your problem is? Do tell." "You taught them boundaries, then let them redraw them with Crayola." Irene tilted her head. "And what am I doing now?" Deborah grinned, snapping the damn crayons. They worked late into the evening, scanning bank documents, screenshotting emails, pulling paper trails from old utility bills. Janelle joined them via speakerphone, directing Irene how to draft a financial timeline for the formal case submission. "Paper," Janelle said flatly. "Courts still love it. Doesn't glitch, doesn't fail to upload, and it never accidentally gets deleted. Stack it, make it undeniable." By the time Deborah left, the table was buried in folders and color-coded sticky notes. Irene sat in silence, the glow of her banker's lamp casting a halo across the paperwork. She stood to clean up when something caught her eye in the hallway mirror. Brittany. Behind her, barefoot, still, holding a piece of unopened mail. "Oops," Brittany said, smile thin. "Didn't realize that was yours." She dropped the envelope on the floor, turned, and walked off. Irene didn't move. She just stared at the envelope, her name, faintly smeared, marked confidential in the corner. The call from the pharmacist came mid-morning, just as Irene was logging medication inventory into the spreadsheet Janelle had created. The voice was chipper, but cautious. "Hi, Mrs. Walsh. This is Carrie over at Midtown Pharmacy. I just wanted to confirm the dosage increase before we process anything further." Irene set down her pen. "I didn't request any change." A pause. "Okay," the pharmacist said carefully. "It came through earlier this week. A woman left a voicemail asking us to double your dose of lorazepam. Said you were under increased stress and not sleeping well." "I didn't make that call," Irene said. Her voice didn't waver. "Understood," Carrie replied, suddenly brisker. "Then we won't process it. I'll mark the request as suspicious and note it in the log." "Please do," Irene said. "And could you send me a printout of that request and the number it came from?" Carrie hesitated. "I'll see what I can do." Irene thanked her and hung up, hands steady now. Her first move: label every pill bottle in the house, color-coded stickers, Sharpie initials. Dosage logs copied twice, once in a notebook, once digitally. She used to manage client exhibits. She could manage her own life. By noon, she documented every prescription interaction for the last 6 months. It was cleaner than she expected. Until this week. She suspected it had started as a bluff. Maybe Brittany was trying to make her groggy. Easier to confuse. Easier to discredit. She flipped open the manila folder from Janelle labeled Medical Interference, Statutes. There it was, black and white. Arkansas Elder Abuse Act, prescription tampering, intentional impairment, felony charge, eligible. The next time Irene spoke to Janelle, it was brief. "Pull it," she said. "The trigger. Whatever you need to file." Janelle didn't ask questions. "Give me 48 hours. That night, Haley knocked once, then pushed Irene's bedroom door open just wide enough to slip inside. She held a notebook tight to her chest. She told the school nurse you were confused, that you'd maybe left the stove on. Twice. Irene didn't react. She said you were declining. There was something raw in Haley's voice. Not quite sadness. Not quite fear. Shame. Maybe. Like she was embarrassed on her mother's behalf. Irene took the notebook. Her hand rested on Haley's for just a second longer than needed. "She's about to find out what confusion really costs," Irene said. The next morning, Jason wandered into the office looking for a charger. Irene had just stepped into the hallway with a fresh cup of coffee and froze as she saw him reach for the printer. He pulled out the top page. His name was on it. So was Brittany's ULS. Notice to vacate cohabitation termination. Half printed. A faint yellow stripe across the page from the low toner cartridge. Jason stared at it like he was trying to read something in a language he hadn't studied in years. "Irene, what is this?" His voice wasn't angry. Not yet, just bewildered. Like he'd finally realized the ground beneath him had been shifting for months. She sipped her coffee. "It's a draft. You're evicting us?" "I'm reclaiming my house," she said evenly. "You're free to leave quietly. Or legally. But you will leave." Jason blinked. You can't do this. You'll find," Irene said softly, "that I can do a great many things you've convinced yourself I've forgotten how to do." She walked past him and into the kitchen, her slippers brushing faintly against the hardwood. Brittany was at the counter, pretending to scroll her phone, pretending not to have heard. But she had. The mail key sat on the table. Irene picked it up and dropped it into her sweater pocket. No more chances. By sunset, Janelle had filed the first report, formal complaint of elder endangerment, supported by pharmacy documentation and witness logs. She also added a second packet, legal notice of pending eviction to be served within the week. Irene stood in the doorway of the sunroom, watching Haley read quietly on the couch, earbuds in. The girl looked up once. Their eyes met. Haley nodded. Irene returned it. It had begun. The courthouse filing took 9 minutes. Irene timed it. Janelle had already prepped the emergency motion to clean copies, notarized statements, the pharmacist affidavit, printed camera screenshots, and Haley's notebook pages, names redacted. The clerk barely blinked when Irene slid it all forward in a tidy stack. "Elder abuse and harassment," Janelle said calmly. "We're requesting an emergency hearing under State Provision Section 9 to 20-103. The stamp hit the top page with a finality that echoed louder than the actual sound. Irene didn't smile, but she felt it somewhere inside, like something loosening after years of grinding tight. As they stepped back into the Fayetteville heat, Deborah adjusted her sunglasses and handed Irene a cold bottle of water. "You just dropped a legal nuke on a woman serving rosé and shrimp cocktail." "She brought this," Irene said. "All I did was light the fuse." They drove in silence for a bit. Janelle in her own car, Deborah piloting Irene's Prius with the smooth confidence of someone who once managed 3 departments and 3 ex-husbands. Irene sat in the passenger seat, the manila folder clutched in her lap. At the next red light, Deborah glanced over. "Want me to serve her?" Irene shook her head slowly. "I'll do it myself." End quote. Brittany's girls' brunch was in full swing by the time Irene got home. The dining table had been pulled into the front room, transformed into a pastel crime scene of macarons, charcuterie, and Prosecco bottles sweating into glass coasters. Women Irene didn't recognize high-pitched laughter, fake tans, big sunglasses indoors. Brittany stood at the center like a game show host, mimosa in one hand, shrimp skewer in the other, performing some exaggerated story about the absolute drama at Haley's school fundraiser. She didn't see Irene walk in, but the other women did. The room fell quiet in uneven pockets as heads turned. One of them actually stepped back a little, as if sensing something shift. Irene didn't raise her voice. She simply set the envelope down on the corner of the table, white, unassuming. Brittany turned mid-sentence and stared at it. "What's that?" she said. Irene looked her dead in the eye. "Your court date." The silence deepened. Jason appeared in the doorway, barefoot, hair rumpled. "Wait, what?" "It's been filed," Irene said, her voice calm but not soft. "Emergency hearing. Next Thursday. You'll need representation." Jason's face drained. You can't do this." "I already did," she said. "You just weren't watching." Brittany's mouth opened, then shut again. One of her friends coughed awkwardly. Another gathered her purse like the air had shifted too much to stay. Irene turned and walked out, not bothering to look back. End quote. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of mint tea. Deborah stirred sugar into her own with surgical precision. "Think she even knows what a felony hearing means?" Deborah asked. "She's about to learn," Irene replied. There was a long pause. "Are you scared?" Deborah asked gently. Irene thought about it. The question deserved real weight. "No," she said. "I was scared when I stopped recognizing my own house. Now I just feel awake." A light knock tapped against the wall. Haley stood in the hallway, arms folded over her sketchbook. "Can I sit?" Irene nodded, and the girl slid into the seat beside her. For a while, they didn't speak. Then Haley leaned in and whispered, "This is your house. I know it." Irene reached over and brushed a strand of hair behind her granddaughter's ear. "That means more than you think." The printer hummed from the office. Janelle had emailed a supplemental exhibit to add to the filing. Irene would retrieve it later. For now, she just wanted the quiet. But the silence didn't last long. Outside, headlights swept across the driveway. Jason's car. He wasn't supposed to be back for hours. He slammed the door harder than necessary, and Irene could already hear his footsteps heading toward the front porch. Then the doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. The morning after the court papers dropped, the laundry room door was locked. Not accidentally. Not jammed. Locked. Irene rattled the handle once, then again. No give. The digital keypad had been reset. She hadn't set a code. A post-it was slapped on the outside in pink marker. Reorganizing. Use the guest bath. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she turned, walked to her office, and sent Janelle the full PDF of the properties certified, appraisal annotated, and initialed. Highlighted were square footage, sole ownership clauses, and the clause designating laundry and garage as exclusive owner access. She'd kept the original scan from 5 years ago, just in case. She added a single line to the email. "They want petty. Let's give them paper." No signature. No emotion. Later that day, she returned from her walk with Deborah to find her phone dead. Odd she'd charged it overnight. She plugged it in again. Nothing. Jason and Brittany were in the living room, pretending to watch a home improvement show while doom-scrolling silently on separate screens. She walked past them, into the kitchen, and noticed the charger cable was unplugged, coiled behind the toaster, still warm. The outlet plate was slightly loose. The next morning, same thing. And the next, after the 3rd time, Irene didn't speak. She simply ordered 2 battery packs online same-day delivery and stashed one in the planter near her bed. She didn't say a word to anyone, but she did check the camera feed later that night. Sure enough, Jason entered her room while she was out front watering plants, opened the top drawer, unplugged the wall adapter, left the door cracked slightly wider than before. The camera timestamp caught it. She clipped the footage, labeled it passive tampering, 3x incident, and uploaded it to Janelle's secure server. She had folders now. Labeled. Dated. Property tampering. Utilities interference. Verbal and environmental harassment. Potential witness. Haley Walsh. Janelle had once said, "Court doesn't need chaos. It needs patterns." Irene was building one. Later that week, Deborah showed up with a box from Lowe's and a grin. "I don't like that Brittany floats past your door at night like she's casing the place," she said. Irene raised an eyebrow. "And?" Deborah held up a slim white sensor. Motion. Triggered. LED. Doesn't record, just lights up if anyone moves past. Cheap but reliable. Scares rats. Both kinds. Within 20 minutes, they'd mounted it just above the molding outside Irene's doorframe. A soft click marked its activation. That night, it lit up twice, once at 11:48 p.m., again at 2:16 a.m. Both times, Irene watched the camera feed in silence. Brittany stood just beyond the glow, barefoot, staring like she wasn't sure if she should knock or burn the place down. She never knocked. By Friday, even Haley was starting to crack. She knocked gently on Irene's door and slipped inside, this time with no sketchbook, just a small USB drive in her palm. "This is the week," she said. "Mom told me. She said she'd win." Irene took the drive. "Did she say how?" Haley looked down. "Number. But she's been intense." "Scared?" Irene asked. Haley shrugged. "Meaner than scared. Like she already lost something and hasn't figured out what yet." Irene nodded slowly and slid the drive into her desk drawer, separate from the others. "I won't ask how you got this," she said, "but thank you." That night, Irene watched the footage on the drive in full, headphones in, face unreadable. At 6:42 p.m. on Wednesday, Brittany was on the phone, pacing the back deck, her voice sharp, anxious. "She's acting normal again. Too normal. You don't get if this goes to court. I'm screwed. The POA didn't go through. Jason's too soft to fight her. We have to make it look worse." The person on the other end was muffled, but Brittany's next sentence rang clear. "I'll handle it. One more incident. That's all I need. Just one more." Irene paused the video, rewound, played it again. Then she reached across the table, picked up her calendar, and circled Thursday. The counselor's office smelled like dry erase markers and lavender hand lotion. Irene sat with her hands folded, knees together, her purse zipped tight like it was holding something far more dangerous than peppermints and a checkbook. Across the desk, Mrs. Langforda, a neatly dressed woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a nervous tick in her left cheek, clicked her pen and glanced again at the documents Irene had brought. "I'm honestly stunned," she said softly. "Irene, this is substantial." Irene didn't nod. She didn't blink. "You said you had concerns." Mrs. Langford hesitated, then reached across her desk, tapping the corner of a file folder marked Haley Walsh, Family Notes. "There was an incident last week," she said carefully. "Haley came into the nurse's office asking for ibuprofen. She mentioned stress at home. Your name came up, not directly, but her mother had told the nurse that you were forgetful, that you'd left the stove on, wandered outside after dark, that maybe—" "I was confused," Irene finished. Langford looked up. "Yes." Irene opened the envelope she'd brought and laid out 3 clean documents. The pharmacist's voicemail transcript, a video still from the camera showing Irene turning off the stove, time-stamped. Haley's notebook page from 2 weeks ago stating, "Mom lied to the nurse. Grandma didn't forget anything." Langford leaned forward. "She gave you this?" "She gave it to the courts," Irene said quietly. "I'm just the courier." There was a long silence. Then Langford pressed her intercom button. "Can I get Principal Wexler in here for 10 minutes? Urgent family matter." Irene didn't wait for the school to decide whether Brittany's words had crossed a line. She just watched them come to their own conclusions. By the time the meeting ended, the school had notified Child Protective Services of a possible issue or not about Irene, but about Haley's emotional safety. Between the gaslighting, the false claims about Irene's cognitive decline, and the child's own statements, Langford explained, were obligated to file. Irene walked out of that school slower than she had come in, but taller somehow, not with triumph, with truth. Her phone buzzed before she even reached the parking lot. "Jason, how dare you bring them into this?" She didn't hesitate. "Irene, you brought them into my home." She hit send, then turned off the ringer. Deborah was waiting on the bench outside, sipping gas station coffee from a reusable mug that read retired, not expired. "Well?" she asked. "They saw it," Irene said. "All of it." Deborah stood, cracking her knees. "Good, they needed to. That girl's been walking on glass for months." They got into the Prius in silence. The late afternoon sun made the dashboard hot to the touch. As they pulled into Irene's driveway, Haley stood waiting at the edge of the porch. Not tense, not wide-eyed. prepared. She walked down to the passenger side before the car even stopped. "Is it done?" she asked. Deborah glanced at Irene. "It started," Irene said, "and we've given the right people permission to step in." Haley nodded slowly, then held out a piece of paper. "Mrs. Langford gave this to me after you left, said it was just paperwork." Irene unfolded it and scanned the header. It was a temporary guardianship authorization transferring Haley's emergency contact and school authority to Deborah Ralston, effective immediately. Haley kicked a pebble with her sneaker. "I said I wanted it that way, just in case." Deborah reached out and pulled her into a quick, one-armed hug. "Don't worry, kid," she said. "I've filled out worse forms to adopt abandoned dogs." That night, the mood in the house shifted again. Not explosive, just still. Brittany didn't speak at dinner. Jason didn't come home. Irene sat in the sunroom with her tea, watching the horizon dim behind the trees. The paperwork sat on the side table beside her guardianship confirmed, CPS filed, her granddaughter safe, at least for now. Then, around 9:17 p.m., the hallway motion light flicked on again. Only this time, it wasn't Brittany standing there. It was Haley. She crept to the door, opened it, and whispered, "She's planning something for tomorrow." I heard her on the phone again. "Same person," she said. "If this doesn't work, she wins for good." Irene didn't answer. She simply reached for her file folder labeled contingency. The judge's bench loomed like a glacier silent, cold, unshakable. Judge Willa Hendricks didn't smile when she entered the courtroom. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Gray bob, minimal makeup, a reputation for favoring hard facts over hard feelings. Perfect. Irene sat beside Janelle at the petitioner's table, her hands folded over a legal pad she hadn't written on once. She didn't need to. Everything had already been said, months in the making. Across from her sat Brittany, spine stiff, lips painted too red. She wore a cream blazer, a size too tight, and had tried badly to match Janelle's quiet authority with oversized pearls and fake composure. Jason sat beside her, shoulders hunched, suit wrinkled at the collar. He didn't look at his mother. Not once. Janelle rose first. "Your Honor, we are here today under Arkansas Code Section 9-20-103, requesting emergency intervention for elder abuse and unlawful harassment. The petitioner, Mrs. Irene Walsh, has provided sworn statements, third-party documentation, and surveillance evidence detailing a sustained pattern of coercion, financial interference, psychological manipulation, and most dangerous attempted medical sabotage." Judge Hendricks didn't blink. "Proceed." Janelle moved like a surgeon. Not flashy, precise. She began with the footage, time-stamped videos of Brittany discarding Irene's belongings, Jason unplugging chargers, the motion light flickering in the night. Then she showed the transcript from Midtown Pharmacy, the request for increased dosage, the pharmacist's affidavit, the call log matching Brittany's phone number. "Prescription tampering," Janelle said, handing the judge a copy. "Filed without consent. Rejected, thank God, by a cautious professional. But the attempt itself meets the legal threshold for felony endangerment." The room was still. Then Brittany stood. "Your Honor," she began, voice strained. "Irene isn't all there anymore. She's paranoid. She thinks everyone's out to get her. I never touched her meds. She's making this up. She's confused." Janelle didn't even look at her. She simply opened a folder and pulled out one last sheet. "Haley Walsh's school notebook, entered voluntarily, corroborates the lie told to school officials about Irene's alleged decline. Independent third-party testimony from the minor." Judge Hendricks adjusted her glasses. "Read the note." Then looked up. "Mrs. Walsh, do you wish to speak?" Irene rose slowly. She didn't look at Brittany, not at Jason. She looked at the judge. "I know who I am," she said. "I've been many things in this life, wife. Mother, paralegal, widow. I've navigated grief, mortgages, death certificates, the quiet horror of growing older in a country that treats you like wallpaper. But I have never been confused." She paused. "Until I started believing I had to ask permission to exist in my own house." Brittany scoffed. Jason glanced at his attorney and leaned in to whisper. The attorney just nodded grimly. Irene returned to her seat, calm and composed. Then, from the gallery, a pair of eyes caught hers clear, steady. Haley. She didn't smile. She just nodded once. It was enough. Judge Hendricks straightened in her chair. The court finds sufficient evidence to grant emergency relief. Mrs. Walsh is awarded full legal authority to initiate eviction proceedings and pursue criminal filings under the Elder Protection Statute. Further, the court advises both respondents to retain criminal defense counsel, effective immediately. A breathless stillness followed. Brittany turned, frantic, whispering to her lawyer. Jason just stared down at his hands. The bailiff handed Irene the official copy. Heavy ink, blue seal. It felt like more than paper. It felt like air. Janelle leaned in. "We can stop here if you want." Irene stared straight ahead. "No," she said. "I want a civil suit." Janelle blinked. "You're sure?" "I want damages. Every bill. Every loan tied to my name. Every therapy copay Haley had to need because her mother was too busy strategizing to love her. I want it in public record. I want a judgment that follows her." She turned finally and looked at Brittany. "Because when I clean my house, I don't just dust." Janelle didn't hesitate. "I'll draft it tonight." As they stood to leave, Haley met them at the exit and slipped her hand into Irene's without a word. Outside the courthouse, the sky cracked with distant thunder. It wasn't raining yet, but it would. The papers slid across the kitchen island like a closing argument. Irene didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her name was in bold on the documents. So were the words, "Final Notice to Vacate, Court-Ordered Enforcement." Jason stared down at the top page, hands gripping the edge of the counter like it might float away. "Come on," he said, voice cracking. "You don't have to do it this way." Irene folded her arms. "I asked nicely. For 2 years." He opened his mouth, then shut it. Behind him, Brittany stood at the sink, back turned, as if her reflection in the window was more important than reality. "This is all her fault," Jason said suddenly, his voice harder now. "She escalated it. She pushed you to this." Irene just looked at him long enough for the silence to do the work. "No," she said. "She took from me. You let her." Brittany turned around. "We don't have a place yet. What are you trying to prove? That you're petty?" "I'm proving the law works," Irene replied. "And if you ever paid attention, you'd know this was mercy." Jason stepped forward, desperate. "Just a week, Mom. Please. For Haley." That name. The gall of it. Irene's jaw set. "You had years for Haley," she said. "You wasted every one of them." Jason flinched like she'd hit him. She didn't flinch at all. End quote. The movers came 44 hours later. Right on time. 2 trucks, 1 sheriff's deputy. Badges, clipboards, efficiency. No emotion. Brittany tried to stall refuse to pack until the very last second. Jason looked hungover and ghost pale, stuffing sweaters into trash bags and arguing with the mover about what belonged to who. No one argued back. They were just there to get it done. Haley stood at the top of the stairs, backpack slung over one shoulder. She didn't help. She didn't speak. She just watched. At one point, Brittany slammed a cabinet door and yanked a stack of plates from the shelf. "These aren't even hers," she snapped. "They were a wedding gift." Then crash. Porcelain shattered across the tile. The sound ricocheted through the house like gunfire. Haley didn't flinch. Irene stood in the entryway, arms crossed. When the deputy stepped toward Brittany, Irene raised a hand. "No," she said. "Let her throw things. It's the only thing she's ever done alone." Deborah arrived with a canvas tote and a bottle of bleach wipes. She held it up like a gift. "Sanctifying the temple?" she asked. "Something like that," Irene murmured. Deborah leaned in. "You okay?" Irene's eyes scanned the room-empty shelves, dragged furniture, broken ceramic by the sink, and Brittany muttering curses under her breath while Jason hauled a suitcase with a broken zipper down the driveway. "I'm getting there," she said. Haley walked down the stairs, her boot soft against the carpeted steps. "Where do I stay tonight?" she asked. Irene looked at her gently. "Wherever you want to." Haley considered that, then pointed to the guest room. "I want my own door, just for now." Irene smiled. "You'll have it." End quote. By sundown, the house was quiet again. Not just still quiet, like it had exhaled. The movers were gone. The deputy had signed the paperwork and left without much ceremony. Brittany had muttered something about lawsuits and, "You'll regret this," but Irene hadn't responded. She hadn't needed to. She stood in the living room, slowly rearranging the mantel. There weren't many photos left. She'd boxed up most of them years ago, when the walls stopped feeling like hers. But she left one. Haley, age 5, asleep on Irene's lap, sunlight on her curls, crayon drawings scattered around them. Irene's head was tipped back, eyes closed, peaceful. She picked up a microfiber cloth and gently wiped the dust from the frame. Deborah stepped beside her, holding a cup of coffee. "You gonna keep that one?" "I think so," Irene said. "It's the only one that never lied." They stood there together in silence. Then the doorbell rang. Just once. Irene didn't move at first, but then she turned and walked to the door, heels silent on the hardwood. She opened it. A man in a dress shirt stood on the porch, folder in hand. "Mrs. Walsh?" "Yes. I'm with Benton County Civil Court. You've been officially named in a response to your civil complaint. You may want to read this carefully." He handed her the folder. She took it, calm, then slowly closed the door behind her. She didn't open the envelope yet. Instead, she walked back to the mantel, laid it on the table, and reached for her tea. The civil response sat unopened on the table for exactly 1 hour and 12 minutes. Then, Irene slit the envelope open with a letter opener shaped like a hummingbird. Inside, 6 pages of poorly stapled grievance, each one angrier than the last. Brittany's signature, crooked and uneven, stained the bottom corner of the final page. The complaint alleged emotional duress, disruption of livelihood, and most absurdly malicious interference in business affairs. Irene stared at the phrase for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Janelle. "I want to hit her where she actually feels it," Irene said. She filed for sympathy. Janelle replied, "Let's file for recovery." Within the week, they did. Janelle submitted a motion for restitution damages, citing household contributions never fulfilled, electricity and internet use from Brittany's side hustle, and unauthorized commercial activity conducted from Irene's property. Then came the lien. Brittany's Etsy storefront Salt and Sister Company had been a revolving door of custom bath bombs and hand-lettered mugs. Irene had watched her spend hours photographing candles on her coffee table, using Irene's lace doilies as aesthetic texture. Now that aesthetic was frozen, the lien halted all revenue streams. Any orders placed were instantly refunded. Her profile, while still visible, was marked pending legal status. Deborah nearly snorted coffee out of her nose when she saw it. "Lord," she posted one of those vague victim rants last night, she said, tapping her phone. "Something about being betrayed by bloodlines corrupted by bitterness." Irene raised an eyebrow. "Did she use the word journey?" "Twice," Deborah said. "And the phrase, narc, energy legacy." They both burst out laughing quietly, because Haley was upstairs doing homework, but it wasn't just humor, it was oxygen. Later that night, Haley padded downstairs in her socks, a single sheet of printer paper in hand. "I made this in art," she said. "We weren't supposed to draw cartoons, but—" She handed it to Irene. It was a sketch of a birdcage. Inside, a woman who looked suspiciously like Brittany was crouched, arms folded, with a word bubble that read, "I didn't do anything wrong." The bars of the cage were labeled lies, guilt trips, silence, denial. At the bottom, scrawled in Haley's rounded handwriting, "Freedom costs more when you steal it." Irene looked at the drawing, then at her granddaughter. "You okay?" she asked. Haley shrugged. "Getting there." Irene tapped the corner of the sketch. "She'll outgrow the hurt faster than I'll forget it," she said. "But you don't need to carry either." Haley gave her a small, tired smile. "I won't. I just needed to draw it first. ID." 2 days later, Brittany's attorney filed a request for mediation. Not trial, not discovery. Mediation. Janelle called Irene the moment it came through. Translation: "She's bleeding out." "I want her to keep bleeding," Irene replied. "You will. But this means she's ready to talk money. Real numbers." Deborah walked in during the call, holding 2 coffees and an envelope. "Irene," she said, "you just got a certified letter from Capital First Bank." Irene opened it while still on the line. Her eyes flicked down the page. "They're confirming the shutdown of the joint household line," she said aloud. "Per my formal request." Deborah grinned. "The checkbook shrinketh." They all heard the ping from Irene's email inbox at the same time. Brittany had responded to the lien. The subject line read, "Urgent. Cease and desist requested, business impact. No salutation. No apology. Just 3 paragraphs begging Irene to reconsider for the sake of a woman trying to rebuild from generational trauma. Irene hit forward. To Janelle. Subject line unchanged. That night, she sat in the sunroom with a glass of lemon water, Haley beside her, sketching something new, a woman standing outside a broken cage, eyes open, wind lifting her hair. The house was still, but this stillness felt earned. Then her phone lit up with an alert. Incoming request, settlement conference, Benton County Mediation Services. Requested by Brittany Walsh. Irene stared at it. She didn't open it yet, but she smiled. The courtroom was colder than last time. Not by temperature, by presence. Jason wasn't there. His attorney filed a statement citing conflict of schedule, but Irene knew better. He was disappearing the way weak men often did, quietly, behind a curtain of excuses. Brittany, however, arrived early. Alone. She looked thinner, jittery. Her hair was pulled back too tight, her heels too high, her blazer buttoned wrong. She carried a folder stuffed with unfiled papers, her lipstick uneven at the corners. Janelle whispered beside Irene. She's unraveling. I won't stop her, Irene replied. The judge entered. Same woman, same firm hand. Before we begin, Judge Hendricks said, this court will rule on the defense's motion to dismiss. Brittany stood, her voice sharper than her body language. Your Honor, the emotional and financial toll of this case has become unbearable. My business is suffering. My family has been torn apart. This is not justice, it's personal vengeance. Mrs. Walsh is leveraging her age and former legal connections to weaponize the system against me. I ask the court to dismiss all pending charges as retaliatory and without merit. Judge Hendricks didn't interrupt. She waited, then said simply, denied. Brittany blinked. Excuse me? You heard the ruling, the judge replied. This case proceeds on all counts. Irene sat still, a small nod the only sign she'd even heard. Her turn came next. She stepped to the stand without hesitation. Her hand rested lightly on the Bible for the oath. Her back was straight. Her voice, when it came, was clear, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the wood-paneled silence. She outlined the timeline. Dates, events, video timestamps, the call to the pharmacy, the camera footage, the lie to the school, the evidence of tampering, the mail, the motion sensors, the bank account, the lien. She didn't editorialize. She didn't cry. She just told the truth like it belonged to her. Because it did. When she finished, the courtroom was so still you could hear the rustle of legal pads. Thank you, Mrs. Walsh, the judge said. You may step down. Next came the envelope. Janelle handed it over on Irene's behalf. Written testimony from Haley Walsh, she said. She is a minor and not required to appear, but she insisted on contributing. It is notarized and voluntary. The judge took her time reading it. So did everyone else in the room. 1 page. Typed. No fluff. My name is Haley Walsh. I live with my grandmother now because it's the first place I've felt safe in 2 years. My mom lied about my grandma's memory. I know it. I heard her do it. I wrote it down when I couldn't sleep. I love both of them, but only one of them ever looked me in the eyes when I cried. I think that matters. No one spoke. Brittany snapped. She turned to her attorney mid-proceeding and hissed, "Do something!" Her attorney stayed still. "You said this would go away?" she shouted. "You said they had nothing." The judge banged her gavel once. "Mrs. Walsh, you are instructed to control yourself or be removed." "I'm the victim here," Brittany said. "She's manipulating all of you." No one moved. And in that absence of reaction, Brittany realized the truth. She wasn't just losing. She was irrelevant now. A whisper from a broken structure no longer standing. The judge reconvened court for final remarks and outlined the trial timeline for the civil portion. The room emptied slowly, feet echoing on worn tile. Outside the courthouse, Irene and Janelle stood under the eaves as light rain began to fall. No thunder, no storm, just steady, calm. Janelle looked over. "You want to celebrate?" Irene shook her head. "Not yet." They walked in silence toward the parking lot, heels clicking on wet concrete, the rain stitching faint circles on Irene's coat. When they reached the car, Irene paused. In the distance, someone sat in the back of a sedan, a silhouette, head down, shoulders hunched. Brittany, still there, still watching, still unable to enter the building she once believed she could control. Irene didn't look away, but she didn't walk toward her either. She simply opened the passenger door and climbed in. The offer came by email. No phone call, no lawyer-to-lawyer fanfare, just a single PDF attachment in Irene's inbox, stamped with Brittany's legal firm's insignia, and marked Settlement Proposal in bold. Janelle scanned it first. She's folding. Irene read it line by line. Lump sum. No admission of guilt, confidentiality requested, dismissal of all civil charges in exchange for financial payout. She wants it over, Irene murmured. She wants out before Discovery drags her Etsy receipts into open court, Janelle replied. This is her white flag. Irene tapped the table once with her index finger. Fine, she said. But I want one clause added. Janelle looked up. I want it in writing, Irene said. Publicly filed. A statement of apology. Janelle's mouth twitched. You want her to say she's sorry? I want her to know the difference between shame and consequence, Irene said. And I want a record that says I didn't imagine any of it. That night, in the living room, she asked Haley if she wanted to help write it. Haley didn't say anything right away. She pulled her knees up on the couch, grabbed a pen, and started scribbling on a notepad. 5 minutes later, she passed it over. To the woman who never raised her voice, just the bar. Irene read the sentence 3 times, then nodded. Keep going, she said. By morning, the full statement was done. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was simple. I, Brittany Walsh, acknowledge that my actions and statements regarding Irene Walsh were false, inappropriate, and caused direct emotional and reputational harm. I accept responsibility for my behavior and regret the consequences of my decisions. I understand the damage inflicted, both to Irene and to those around us. I apologize, fully, and without defense. Irene sent it to Janelle. She got a response an hour later. Appended to settlement. Signed. The court will enter into public record. Jason never responded. No email. No message. No check-in on Haley. Just absence. As if erasure could substitute for explanation. Irene didn't mention him again. Oh. The money cleared 2 weeks later. A clean wire transfer. Quiet numbers filling a quiet account. Irene stared at the balance, then closed the laptop. The next morning, she wrote a check $18,000 to an elder legal advocacy nonprofit out of Little Rock. Janelle raised an eyebrow when she found out. That's generous. That's overdue, Irene replied. There are women who don't have cameras or Janelle Kleins. Janelle smiled. That's how you spend victory. Irene tucked the check into an envelope and walked it to the mailbox herself. The spring breeze ruffled the cuffs of her shirt as she slid it in and pulled the little red flag upright. A different kind of surrender. Later that week, the apology appeared in the county court database. A footnote to most. A monument to Irene. Deborah printed it out on thick cardstock and framed it with brass corners. She handed it to Irene like it was a diploma. Put it somewhere visible, she said. Or mail it to every woman we've ever met. Irene laughed. Not the bitter kind. The real kind. She didn't hang it in the living room. She tucked it into the hallway linen closet, behind the old towel safe, dry, always accessible. Haley found it later. Why hide it? She asked. Because the people who need to see it already have, Irene said, and the ones who never believed me never will. That night, the house felt full. Not cluttered held. Dinner was quiet. Lemon chicken, fresh green beans, a little candle in the center of the table. Afterward, Irene walked through each room slowly. The hardwood didn't creak the way it used to, or maybe she just knew how to walk it now. She passed the mantel. The photo was still there, Haley, age 5, curled up in her lap. She paused, then walked to the office and opened a drawer. Inside, the original folder labeled Contingency. She removed every document, stacked them neatly, and fed them one by one through the shredder. When it jammed halfway through Brittany's fake POA form, Irene didn't force it. She just smiled, unplugged the machine, and left the paper halfway devoured. Some things deserved to be chewed slow. At 10:04 p.m., her phone buzzed. A new number. She answered without speaking. A pause, then a voice. worn thin by arrogance and time. "You think this makes you better than me?" Irene didn't answer. The voice continued, quieter now. "You broke the family." Irene spoke then, soft, certain. "Number I just stopped letting it break me." Then she hung up. She didn't block the number. She just turned off the ringer. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and baked apples. No microwave beeps, no takeout containers, no shouting from the next room. Just soft music, fresh linen on the table, and glassware that hadn't been used since Irene's retirement party a decade ago. The dining room, once a corridor of tension and closed doors, had returned to its original shape, invitation. Deborah arrived first, bearing a bottle of chilled white wine and a loaf of crusty bread wrapped in a dish towel printed with dancing lemons. "If I'm going to dine with power," she said, setting it down, "I refuse to arrive empty-handed." Janelle came next, dressed down for Onseno courtroom heels. No sharp blazer, just a navy sweater and jeans, sleeves pushed up. A softness in her posture that hadn't been there before. "Can I set the table?" she asked. "You're already seated," Irene replied. "Tonight, you're a guest." They laughed, 3 women, different ages, different paths, but bound now by the same thread. Survival, stitched into sovereignty. Haley was last. She wore a dress Irene didn't recognize. Soft green, sleeves to the elbows, with a little embroidered branch near the collarbone. Her curls were pulled back, and under one arm she carried a guitar. Irene raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know you still played." "I didn't either," Haley said, "until I started sleeping through the night again." Dinner was slow, unrushed. The chicken fell off the bone. The green beans had been sautéed in garlic and butter, not microwaved from a bag. Everyone went back for seconds. They passed dishes without comment, without tension. There were no raised voices, no insults delivered sideways, no cell phones on the table, just quiet clinks of silverware, soft laughter, and the hum of a household returned to breath. After dessert, Haley stood. "Can I play something?" They all turned to her at once, surprised but already nodding. She sat on the edge of the couch, adjusted the guitar on her lap, and took a deep breath. "I wrote this 2 weeks ago. I wasn't sure if I'd play it, but it's called For Grandma." Irene didn't move. She just folded her hands in her lap and waited. Haley began to play. The melody was simple but clean, finger-picked, steady, not perfect, but real. Notes swelled and dipped like thoughts forming before words. It wasn't sad, exactly. It was remembering. The bridge shifted brighter, somehow, like opening a window. When it ended, no one clapped right away. Irene blinked twice, then reached up and touched her cheek. She hadn't realized she was crying. "You like it?" Haley asked, suddenly shy. Irene smiled. "It's the most honest thing I've heard all year." Janelle raised her wine glass. "Agreed." Deborah nodded. "She plays better than my ex-husband, and he thought he was Clapton." They all laughed again, deeper now, looser. Irene stood and raised her own glass. Her hand was steady. "To quiet power," she said. "The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that doesn't need to." They drank to that. Later, after everyone had left, Irene padded through the kitchen barefoot, putting away dishes one by one. Not rushed, not dragging. She stopped in front of the fridge. On the door was a single magnet, new one she'd kept buried for years. It read, "Strong women raise strong women." She pressed her hand to it for just a second, then turned off the light. The house didn't groan or creak. It breathed. She walked down the hall toward her room, past the mantel. The photograph still sat there. Past the linen closet. The framed apology still tucked behind towels. When she reached her bedroom, she stopped. The porch light was still on. She stepped to the front window and peeked through the curtain. A car sat parked across the street. Dark, still, unmoving. But she didn't feel fear. Not anymore. She walked back to her bed, slid beneath the covers, and turned the page of her book. If someone wanted to sit in the dark and watch a woman sleep in peace, let them. The pen glided across the last page in clean, measured strokes. Irene's signature full, steady, no flourish, just finality. Haley sat on the edge of the armchair across from her, legs tucked under, watching in silence. She hadn't asked what the documents were about. She already knew. The lawyer, A younger associate from Janelle's office named Harper carefully gathered the pages and slid them into a leather folio. "It's done," she said. "Witnessed, notarized, filed under full capacity. No ambiguity." "Perfect," Irene replied. Haley looked down at her hands. "So, it's all mine someday?" "Not all," Irene said softly. "Just the part that matters." Janelle had handled the estate protection language herself airtight, forward sealed. No room for contestation. No loopholes for estranged family members to weasel their way into probate. Jason's name wasn't mentioned. Brittany's was cited only once. Excluded party. When they left, Harper shook Irene's hand and said, "Most people do this in their 70s or later." Irene smiled. "I didn't need 70 years to see who deserved what. Is." Later that afternoon, Deborah helped hang the new frame. They chose the hallway, just past the kitchen right where the old thermostat used to hang before Irene had it replaced. The quote was carved in wood, painted bone white with black lettering in Haley's careful hand. "Serve nothing cold, except justice." Deborah stepped back to admire it. "That's got kick." "It's Haley's," Irene said. "Her idea. Her font." "She's gonna run the world," Deborah murmured. "She's going to choose it," Irene corrected. "That's the difference." Is. The day wound down slowly. The dishes were done. The hallway light glowed warm against the wall. Haley had retreated to her room with headphones on, sketching something quietly beside a mug of peppermint tea. Irene stood in the doorway, watching for a moment. Then she stepped outside. The porch light flickered once, then held. The air smelled like fresh grass and the faintest trace of someone grilling 3 houses down. The sunset wasn't dramatic, no blood orange clouds. No poetic streaks. Just soft amber, settling behind the trees like a curtain closing on a scene well played. She walked to the edge of the porch and breathed deep. No tension. No waiting. Just breath. Deborah joined her a moment later, holding 2 mugs. "You okay?" she asked. Irene took one. It was lemon and honey. "I've never eaten better," she said, eyes on the horizon. They stood there a while. No need to talk. Just the creak of wood beneath them and the steady rhythm of a neighborhood quieting down. When Irene turned back inside, she passed the mantel one last time. The photo of Haley still sat there, but beside it now stood something new. A small ceramic tray glazed, cracked at one edge. The same one Brittany had once used to deliver a meal with a smirk and the line, "Eat up, it's your last supper." Irene had kept it, not for memory, for metaphor. She tapped it once as she passed, then stepped into her office and opened a drawer labeled Finals. Inside, copies of the will, the apology, the lien release, and a note addressed simply, "Haley." Not for now, but for someday. She closed the drawer gently, then walked back to the sunroom. The lights were low. Her house, her rules, a sanctuary reclaimed. As she sat down and pulled a blanket over her lap, her phone buzzed once on the table. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked toward the hallway, where her granddaughter slept behind a door she chose. And then she smiled, quiet but full. Because peace, it turned out, didn't have to be silent, just earned. She served me a tray. I served her court papers and the future she thought was hers.